I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm excited to talk about HBO Max's new series Minx with Emmy-nominated makeup department head Carleigh Herbert. So Carleigh, you have worked on a ton of projects throughout your career in various positions, I should add. But how gratifying is it when you get to be part of actually launching a show and developing its signature or initial look, and that as the head of your department?
It's amazing. I mean, it's honestly a dream come true. And like a period piece, there's nothing like more challenging than that. So the challenge of it all and then designing from the start has been like a really wild, fun experience. It's like it becomes your baby,
Mhm.
You're like all these characters and all these actors are like your little babies. So it's been really cool to like, meet with Ellen, meet with Rachel, get the concept, start figuring out characters, and then seeing it go to a series and seeing people really love it and getting picked up. It's been super rad to be a part of.
I can imagine. And like you said, the show is a period piece. It's set in 1970s United States and centers on the creation of the titular erotic magazine for women.
Yes.
Talk about researching beauty and makeup looks and nude magazines from that era to then incorporate into the show.
So I mean, I bought about like 20 or 30 Playgirls. So
Hmm.
that was kind of my quote unquote eye candy for all the Minx magazine stuff. But whenever I start researching a period piece, I start going into the specifics of like this was Los Angeles in 1972. So like I kind of honed in on like the world there. I started looking at celebrities and magazines and looking at like what was popular in the early 70s music wise, movie wise, all those kind of things. And then I also would I love like the old Sears catalogs and all those old like clothing because that really gives you an idea of just like quote unquote normal people and how they were looking. And then
Hmm.
going off of that and diving into different worlds. I also, like I said, we looked at a lot of Playgirls. I looked at, erotic magazines and stuff to get the idea of how the guys were rocking those days. And then I also, for like, we had the bottom dollar girls as well that were playing in Doug's world. And what I would do for that is I would go and I would look at a lot of like old 60s and late 60s and early
Hmm.
70s kind of pornos. And I would look at the adult actresses because we would have like different things like we'd have naughty nuns or school teachers. And so I would try and find old pornos that kind of matched that and recreated the makeup. And on top of that, for the regular makeup as well, like because it was 1972, we wanted to bring like a late 60s influence into it as well. So I'd look at a lot of late 60s stuff. And like a lot of the old cosmetic ads were really rad to look at. Like you had Yardley, you had Revlon, you had Max Factor. Like I really gravitated towards Yardley and like their color schemes, which were like, light pastels and light like fall colors and stuff like in tones like that. So just like totally diving in and just being like embellished by the early 70s is the goal, in any
Hmm.
aspect possible.
Right, and I know that part of your ensuing work then sort of entailed outlining breakdowns and boards of looks, including everything
Yeah.
from nail shapes to blush placement. So did you
Yeah.
break those into characters, into episodes, or what did that process look like?
So I did like an overall, like I would do an overall like breakdown for all the artists that would come in to kind of give you an idea of like these are the color tones in our world, these are the lipstick tones, these are the nail shapes, and then get kind of an idea. And then from there, I would make different boards pertaining to, I would call it different worlds. So you had like the lad world,
Okay.
you had the bottom dollar world, you had the Manhattan 1960s world. So I'm just, we're very visual. So I was such a nerd. I would just make boards for everything and just pull references and references and references. And then as far as like our main characters go, like Shelley and Joyce and all of those guys, I would do specific boards for them as well, so that their
Mhm.
look kind of stayed in a certain vibe, but then could still play within it. Like how Joyce would be very natural, but then when she would go and do her interviews and stuff, she would bump herself up a little bit by like putting shimmer on her eyes and maybe throwing on like a little liner. And then you go back and you see that in the late 60s, she used to doll herself up and stuff like that. So it got really specific when it came to each character and each board and kind of the breakdown and the idea of what they went through and how their makeup would change throughout the season, if at all.
Mm. Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that because we'll get into some of the individual looks in just a second. But of course, one of the most discussed aspects of the show is its depiction of full frontal male nudity. I mean, straight away in the first episode, there's a 1 minute scene of in which around 20 men audition bottomless to become the
Yes.
centerfold in Minx. So talk about creating prosthetic penises and ensuring they looked era appropriate, considering grooming standards have certainly changed throughout the years.
Right. It was interesting because with the grooming, after and me and Ellen had a lot of conversations about penises and about, sorry, I just say it, and pubes and stuff like that. And what was funny is, a lot of people didn't shave, but then some people did, and some people would fully shave. So you kind of had a wide range of that. The whole scene in the first episode with all those guys, those were all their penises. And the producers and Ellen handpicked those for how they were rocking. So I kind of wasn't involved with that. But then as far as the Shane character and the David character and all that stuff, I think we had 4 or 5 prosthetic penises that played throughout it. And I would apply it, or Sue and Claire would apply it from my team, or we had a couple really great artists come in. But basically we worked with Autonomous Effects, which is owned by Jason Collins, and he created all these badass penis prosthetics that we put on. He also did the Pam and Tommy in Euphoria, to give you an idea. And basically, yeah, he's the master. He's the master of Jason Collins, the master of dicks. Please quote that.
Perfect.
But he's so great. I love him. But basically, we had a couple different ways of doing the prosthetics, and it kind of depended on what was called for and what the person and stuff like that. So for the Shane prosthetic, and if any of this is confusing, please ask me to be better about it. But for the Shane prosthetic, that was the first one we did. And that was actually kind of you would glue everything in the front over the crotch, but depending on what the prosthetic was, some of them had a little belt loop that would hang around, which was the Shane one. Or we would have just a free flowing one that just basically was glued right to the front, and that's all it was. And so we had different versions of that. And I think the most interesting thing for me, and also I'm sure for the guys involved, was learning to tuck. So all of the boys, I mean, there's 2 ways you could tuck your penis back and then put a prosthetic over, the flatter side of your crotch, or you could actually put your penis in the prosthetic in some of the prosthetics. But most of the guys wearing these for these guys are also wearing these for 12 to 14 hours a day, right? So a lot of these guys were just tuck it back. It's just deal with it. So it was a really interesting process, me trying not to quote unquote mansplain and learn about people's penises and how to tuck them back and all that stuff. But all the guys were really great, we'd get someone cast. I talked to Ellen about it. We would talk about a design. We'd meet with Jason, and then he'd either sculpt and create sculpt from fresh, mold it, do a silicone prosthetic, or we would use we actually used the Pam and Tommy penis for the David.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
and we just we would just lay hair and just paint it differently, and make it look a little different. But yeah, I forgot what else I was gonna dive on about. But all the guys were really great. Whenever we casted a guy, I would have phone calls, I would meet with them in person. It wasn't just a thing where they showed up and I was take your pants off, let's see what happens. But again, I've done a lot of prosthetics. I've slit a lot of throats. I've even bled out penises for camera, for horror movies, but I had never done a prosthetic penis. So that was it's super challenging, but it was oddly enough, it was fun because all the actors were really, really great.
Right, and how did you decide, or you and Ellen decide, in which instances to use prosthetics and which ones not to?
I think Ellen, she made a good point with one of these interviews. She said too, one of the reasons she liked using prosthetics is because you can control your atmosphere. You know what I mean? You can, the penis looks the same for 12 hours. So that was off the bat, I think, one of her reasons for wanting to do it.
And this is a very stark jump, but I do want to from there jump into some of the individual character looks that you already touched on before. Starting with Joyce's, of course, because what's fascinating about her is that she's kind of a bundle of contradictions, isn't she? She has this passion and this drive, but we see throughout the season that she sometimes has her blinders on and becomes her own obstacle. So are these contradictions something that you wanted reflected in her makeup, or what was important to you when outlining her initial look?
I think Which I love that you said that, because I love the dynamic of how she's all about feminism and stuff, but at the same time, like she has to kind of like get her gripes about like the guys, because she starts kind of playing into that and like judging the guys in the same way that she had been judged. So I thought that was really cool. Joyce is like, for her character, her makeup was just very, very minimal, very like, she presents herself, but she only gives a shit so much. And so for her, like her playing her looks up and stuff were just because she's like, I got to go on TV, I got to do this. But at the very beginning, when we meet her, she's very dulled down, she's very simple. And then you kind of see her start to play with makeup a little more as she goes. And you don't know yet that she had like the late 60s where she would like just glam herself up for work. But we just kind of pulled like, oh, as she's in Bottom Dollar a little more, she starts pulling influences from people here and there. So maybe like, yeah, in the 60s, she would do like a little liner or something, but now she's going to throw like a shimmer on. So when she's like, oh, I got to like bump myself up, she like looks at Bambi and Tina and she's like, oh, well, they play up their eyes a little bit, I guess I'll throw a shimmer on my lid, you know? So that was kind of the idea. But for the most part, we wanted her really minimal so that we could kind of see her break out of her shell a little bit here and there and have the hair and makeup kind of reflect that. And like for her, you know, my biggest influence for her is Cheryl Tiegs kept popping up and popping up. So she was really like the look that I would go for. And so Cheryl, sometimes when she'd get played up, she'd just play up her lashes and pop like a pastel color on her lid. So I really dug that for Joyce. Does that explain it well enough?
Absolutely. And, you know,
okay, cool.
Yeah, and to build on that, what we see throughout the season, as Joyce encounters people from all these different walks of life, is that she is willing to listen to people and very much evolves throughout the season. So based on that, what are some of the subtle changes that you applied to her look throughout the season to sort of reflect that journey?
So the subtle looks are kind of like how I said, she would just, because we don't want to push her too much. She's still like, this is a shorter time period that she's exploring. So again, it would just be like when she would go to camera or when she would do like a press conference, she was like, okay, I guess I'll throw on a gloss. I'll like do my mascara and throw on a pastel color, you know, but that was just kind of her simple way of bumping things up. So yeah, I just kept it really simple. Like she does it because she feels like she has to, not necessarily because she wants to be dolled up or wants to do these things, you know? And what was cool is Christopher Fulton, who was the department head of hair, like he played with the hair like that as well. So she would always have the same kind of hairdo, you know, maybe up in a bun and just the same minimal makeup. And then when we saw her do these things, you'd see her bumped up and really like trying. And I thought it was cool that they did the ode to the 60s, because I know I've mentioned this a couple of times, but you saw that her character used to live in this world. So like she can jump back to that and pull from that as well.
Absolutely.
She knows how to be that. She just doesn't want to be that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, then there's Doug, whose look is very distinctive as well. And
oh my God,
I'm sure, right. And I'm sure the beard was more up to the hair department, though you can certainly talk about it as well. But what was important to you when...
No, makeup does all the facial hair and stuff, actually.
Oh, the facial hair. Perfect.
Yeah. So we like, depending on the show, this one, we took care of all the sideburns, all the facial hair and stuff like that. And we would just, you know, meet with Chris and his team and make it all blend together. Sorry, what was your question? I totally...
No, absolutely. Just about that and what was important to you when developing his signature look.
So for Doug, you know, like he's like the sexy don't give a shit dude, right? You know, like he kind of comes off skeezy and whatever, but then you get to know him and you're like, oh, this dude's actually a cool dude, and he just kind of plays off this character a little bit. And you know, everybody had their opinions. Jake was like, I want to keep the beard, and I was like, hell yeah. So it was funny enough, when I pulled boards for him, a lot of the guys I was getting were like kind of scruffy beards. And so Jake's thing is we would groom it a little bit, but at the same time, you know, we'd like go in and keep everything a little rough, like no straight lines. And Jake started, I noticed like with his character, he started playing with his beard a lot. So we kind of just trim it. So if he was playing with it, it didn't get all crazy, but it still looked like roughed up, you know, at the same time. But he was super chill. Like Jake's so rad. You know, I maybe powdered him once a day. The only time I put makeup on him, we thought it would be funny for when he came out on the Dick Cavett show. I just gave him a full face of makeup for that. Other than that, he's super, super chill, you know, kind of always shiny. He's just Jake Johnson, man. He's such a badass. It's popping those shirts and showing that chest hair, man. I love it.
It's true. I love it. And then, you know, from there are the very under-recognized background or guest actors who are so crucial, especially in period pieces, since they are so indispensable to selling the period.
Yes.
And on this show, we have everything from college students to conservative office workers to the mob.
Yeah.
So just talk about working with those actors and ensuring that each and every one of their looks was distinctive, which I have to assume was a ton of work.
It was, you know, but I love it though. I love it so much. And it is a thing because you want everything to look very specific. You want to look at someone and be like, they're a mob person, but you don't want it to be, what am I trying to say? Oh, shit.
You don't want them to blend together in a
COVID
way
brain.
that...
Or be like too stereotypical that you're like,
Right.
oh, this is cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
But for that, you know, again, with all the actors, like they would always come in and we would always talk, and some actors would have ideas. I would always show people boards and stuff. But like, again, it was just a lot of research and pulling different looks and pulling different moods and kind of seeing what like offset different characters against each other. You know, like you go into the mob people and you have the women that are like dressed to the nines, like they're the housewives, they bring in the money, they get what they want, they, you know, and then you have their mob guys that are a little like, you know, where you see like, you know, our lads guys who are very conservative and clean cut and like mustache, clean shaven, or like a very well groomed beard. You go and you see these mob guys and they're kind of all over the place. Like their hair is kind of like poking out, like they have kind of a look, but again, they don't give a shit. So you want to see like a big distinction between that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and that distinction is absolutely there. I think if you look at single frames, you will see that there's so many details in the background, and I think that's always great, and it's so important.
Thank you. That was such a big thing for us. Like all of the background we treated like main cast as well. Like everybody went through chairs. Not one person saw an artist. You know, and so that's really cool for you to say, because that was really important for us to be able to see all those different things. You know, and seeing like Joyce walk into the bottom dollar world and like see a complete difference, which was another reason why her makeup was so played down. So every world you go in, you're just like, oh, you don't fit in here, do you? Where the hell do you fit in?
That's fascinating. And, you know, is there any episode or piece of work from this first season that we have not touched on, but you are, you know, very proud of and would like to highlight before we slowly wrap things up?
I mean, there's so many looks that I loved. I really liked Wendy Ma. She was really fun. She was like the badass feminist who had her makeup. She always had kind of like an early 70s like smoky eye and a pop of a red lip. She was a lot of fun. Lenny's character Shelley was really cool because you know she started off very late 60s like housewife, and you see her kind of go into like the bottom dollar world and start getting influenced by Bambi a little bit, and then cut to her doing the photo shoot where she completely encompasses a Bambi look, and then going into all her fantasy looks was really fun. So like, you know, taking Lennon's character and bringing her throughout the seasons was a lot of fun and stuff like that, you know.
She's such a great character.
She's such a great character. These actors are really, really rad. They're all really cool. But yeah, other than like, I would just have to think about it for a second, all the different worlds. But that was like, the different worlds were really fun for me.
Right.
Like going into, like the teen queen, that was really fun. Like all the girls, like to the nines, their little pastel colors and their glosses. And then you have Joyce kind of sitting in the middle of it, like what the hell is going on? You know, it was a lot. There are a lot of different things. I mean, the penis prosthetics were definitely the most challenging and wild thing.
I can imagine.
The text between me and Ellen are just hilarious, and just, you know, there were some days where she'd be like, that's too much pube, and I'd be like, that totally is too much pube, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out where the pubes are, or like stuff like that. So so yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That was very insightful. And, you know, on a final note, I read an interview in which you talked about how much it meant to you when you were first accepted into Local 706, the Makeup Artists and Hairstylists Guild. And, you know, jump ahead, you are now a 3-time Guild nominee and a 4-time Emmy nominee. So what has this trajectory and this acknowledgement from your peers meant to you?
Everything. I mean, honestly, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would never think I'd be at this place, but I'm extremely grateful. And, you know, a big part of why I'm there is a lot of older artists like accepting me and pushing me. And so being at the place I am has been really cool because it's been through respect from other artists that I look up to, and just like a lot of hard work. And you get so caught up in the work and what you're doing 18 hours a day. And for me, I'm always, I don't want to say insecure, like, oh, I'm stuck at makeup, but I'm always just pushing myself and trying to be better. So a lot of the time, that's what I'm so focused on. So it's interesting to be like, oh yeah, I remember 10 years ago, and I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I do. That's crazy, because you get so in the moment, you have to remember. But I mean, I have to be quite honest, like when I got to department head American Horror Story, that was like my career goal. And then now like doing Minx and stuff, that's pushed me even more. And so it just keeps getting radder and radder. Honestly, it's pushed further than I thought I would be. So I feel very grateful.
I can imagine. I should also say congratulations are in order since Minx was renewed for a second season.
Thank
And
you.
I'm so excited to see where the story goes from that final moment in the finale.
Me
And
too.
Carleigh, thank you so much for joining me today. It was such a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
And for loving Minx.
Of course.